After lunch, and his man, many of you would have either read. He writes right across the media. He appears on Sky, principally he does a weekly slot on the Bolt Report. I've been on several panels with him. He's a wonderful rising thinker in the country. He's the director of research at the Institute of Public Affairs, which is such a great sponsor, not just of this conference, but of our philosophy across the country. And he'll speak. He's told me he's not going to give an economics talk. It's going to be broader than that, centering on values. Some of you may know that Noel Pearson called him a child soldier of the IPA. So we can expect him to arrive with his assault rifle, and we'll see in a second. So please give a big welcome for Daniel Wild.
Thanks, mate. Thank you. Thank you, Tavneer, for that, and thank you to you all, and thank you to Andrew Cooper for organising a fantastic event. It's already been a massive success, and we've still got the rest of the day and tonight to go. As Tavneer said, I'm Daniel Wild from the Institute of Public Affairs, one of Noel Pearson's faceless, nameless child soldiers. You'd know Mr. Pearson was speaking about the proposed Indigenous race-based voice to Parliament that he wants embedded in our Constitution. Mr. Pearson last week said, and I quote him, "Our opponents at the IPA attempt to put a liberal philosophical sheen on Andrew Bolt's argument that a First Nations voice would constitute separate treatment on the base of race in the Constitution." Well, it would. You're 100% right. But Mr. Pearson, those liberal philosophical sheens, would they include things like equality before the law? Would they include things like the rule of law, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, the supremacy of our constitutional parliament, and importantly, the equal and moral worth and dignity of all individuals regardless of their biological makeup? If defending those institutions makes me and my colleagues child soldiers, then we are happy to carry that mantle. Mr. Pearson's comments and those by others, Senator Keneally, or the actions of groups like Antifa, I think get to a much broader and deeper challenge that we're facing in our country, but also right across the West when we look at Trump, Brexit, Poland, Hungary, Italy, what is going on. We know that there's a disproportionate influence of noisy knowledge economy workers, the elites at the expense of working class and middle class Australians. And this has really led to the hollowing out of the middle class and a big challenge for the middle class. And I think the disdain that the elites have for the working class and middle class of this country, and indeed right across the Western world, was captured by Hillary Clinton's famous statement about the basket of deplorables. She was talking about us and people like us. But everybody remembers the basket of deplorables. But she also said another word, a word that I think better captures the mentality of the elites in the Western world, and that is irredeemable. Being irredeemable, being called irredeemable, is worse than being called deplorable because there's no coming back from that. They're not interested. They're not there to represent people like us. They're not there to represent the middle class and the working class of this country and of those around the Western world. They see us as impediments to their agendas. They see us as people that need to get out of the way and die off. And that word irredeemable, I think, captures a lot of what we saw in our most recent election here by the Labor Party. Labor took to the election a fundamentally transformative agenda, and I mean transformative in a very bad way. They wanted to transform our economy with radical, unrealistic, unattainable, unachievable climate policies that would make no difference to the global temperature, no difference to the global environment, but it would impose significant and irreparable economic damage on working class, middle class Australians. They wanted to hold a referendum They would ask Australians to divide themselves by race. They wanted more limitations on freedom of speech, more limitations on freedom of religion. They wanted higher taxes, retrospective taxes, taxes on self-funded retirees. They wanted to radically transform this country because they think it's irredeemable. They don't think it can be fixed. They don't want to have changes. They don't want to preserve it. They don't value our institutions or our history. And this is true right across the Western world. They think that we're irredeemably racist, that we were founded on an irredeemably violent basis, and that all of the institutions and all of the values that have stemmed from that founding need to be undermined and removed. This hollowing out and this attack on our values and our institutions, I think, presents an existential threat to our culture and our way of life. And that is why preserving and strengthening the working class and middle class of this country and countries around the Western world is so key to the continued success of centre-right, mainstream Australian values. The challenge that we face is that there is no neutrality. Yes, we must protect and defend our freedoms, individual freedoms to speech, to religion, of association, but we also need to be aware of what is happening with people's values, what is happening with their views, how they're being shaped by our various institutions. And we cannot be completely indifferent to the moral content of people's lives because they affect all of us, and in aggregate, they provide what we know as culture, and everything is downstream from culture. And so the task is, how do we set up a policy environment that will support and help thrive middle class and working class Australians? Now, I have 5 pillars and 5 propositions that provide people with a stake in their own lives, a stake in the success of their communities, a stake in the success of the future of our country. And these are not radical ideas. These are ideas that have come around time and time again throughout history, but that's because they're fundamentally correct. We know that home ownership gives people a stake in their community. Family formation gives people a stake in the future. Work gives people a stake in their own success and in their own dignity. Small business and enterprise, it gives people a stake in the success of the economy. And control over people's own retirement incomes gives people a stake in the capitalist free market economic system. Once people own something, once people possess something, once people plant their own seeds in the world, a transformation of values takes place. And that is why the left require the hollowing out of the middle. They require the hollowing out of civil society. So there's only atomised individuals on the one hand and big central government on the other hand. If we go through those pillars, we know that home ownership rates are down about 25% over the last 3 decades for young Australians. Now, we know also that people who own their own homes are more conservative in a dispositional sense than those who do not own their own homes. They tend to prefer stability, the preservation of the amenity of their local area. They oppose radical change that will damage the value of the home, and they become more attentive to the local politics in their area. In other words, home ownership makes people mini-capitalists and mini-democrats. It teaches them the virtue of private property and makes them sceptical about unwanted incursions by outside forces on that property. It's not for no reason that Australia's longest-serving and greatest Prime Minister, Sir Robert Menzies, knew about the importance of home ownership as an institutional bulwark against the encroachment of communism and socialism in the post-World War II era in Australia. He argued that the home is the foundation of sanity and sobriety. It is the indispensable condition of continuity. Its health determines the health of society as a whole. National patriotism, Menzies said, inevitably springs from the instinct to defend and preserve our own homes. To Menzies, those who were engaged in home ownership, paying down their mortgages, tended to not be the kinds that would favour revolutionary activities. The second pillar is family formation, which is really the fundamental building block. From a political perspective, the family creates an incentive for people to think about the future, to think about things that are above and beyond themselves. They become concerned with what is being taught in their schools, and maybe more importantly, what isn't being taught in their schools, how the neighbourhood is changing, what kind of culture will their children grow up in, and what kind of economic opportunities will be available for their children and for future generations. The third pillar is the dignity of work. Work is the epicenter of a successful and flourishing life. It provides for everything else that we need. It provides for home ownership, it provides for family formation, it allows people to participate in their local community. And we know that work brings a whole series of physical benefits, of mental benefits, of financial benefits, but it also brings moral benefits that we often forget in our political discourse. It gives people a sense of fulfillment, of dignity, and of providing and serving others. The act of applying one's skills and capabilities to create value for other people in a free, open marketplace is perhaps one of the most fundamental expressions of the human condition. But the assault on work continues. Now, I am by background an economist, and I would argue economists in the economics profession has done more than any other profession to undermine the idea of the dignity of work. Adam Smith talks about the only point of production is for what it allows you to consume. And we see this assumption embedded in mainstream economic models around utilitarian economics. Work is something to be avoided. And of course, it's good. If you can work less, consume more, that's a good proposition. But it misses a fundamental moral component of work, that it provides the fundamental dignity that people are able to achieve independence, form their own families, and self-sustaining communities. We also see it with proposals for a universal basic income. Now, that would create a new permanent underclass of underemployed and unemployable people who are paid off by the government to no longer work. But what's worse about the concept of a universal basic income is it treats people as liabilities that need to be managed rather than assets that need to be developed. It treats people who don't have the skills to keep up with technological change as people who just get a paycheck and go away and not worry about it. But we know that the same amount of money from a paycheck is not the same as getting an equivalent amount of money from a welfare check. There is a very important moral difference, and on this point, it is the left who are the materialists. The left are obsessed about money. The left are obsessed about finances. They believe people can just be bought off with more welfare without considering what it means fundamentally to work and to produce. The fourth pillar of giving people a stake is small business and enterprise, which gives people a stake in the success of the economy. Small business owners are wary of government intervention through taxes, through red tape, and they're often an indispensable part of their local community. But more importantly, it's not just an economic issue. Small business is actually the essence of democracy. Victor Davis Hanson, the US military historian, argues that democracy flourished in ancient Athens, in part because of their relatively unique economic composition. He argues only a settled countryside of numerous small farmers could provide the prerequisite mass for constitutional government and egalitarian solidarity. He argues it is clear that with the middling farmers, when they were in control of the Greek polis, government was broad-based. It was representative of the economic interest of most citizens. It was designed to follow the dictates of law to provide security and stability. Its legislation was primarily concerned with property ownership. This was the entire principle behind Athenian democracy. But we know that small business is in decline. For example, we know that the number of people, the percentage of workers in small business is down 20% over the last 2 decades. We know small businesses are having a harder time of growing and taking on more employees. Every year, around 6% of all small businesses on net grow in the sense they take on more employees next year than the year before. But in 2018, that was just 1%, the lowest that we have on record. This is not just an economic concern, this is an existential threat to our very democracy. The final pillar is control over your own finances, and in particular, control over your own retirement income. Now, I would say Australia's system of superannuation has many flaws, and I would argue it should be voluntary. But it has created an asset-owning democracy with millions of mini capitalists who have an incentive and who have a stake in the success of a free market, capitalist-based economic system. They don't want government retrospectively changing rules with regards to decades upon decades of savings and accumulated wealth that they have undertaken, the hard work that they have done, the businesses that they have run, the people that they've employed, the families they've raised, the people they've supported, the friends they've supported, the community groups they've supported. They don't want that taken away retrospectively by government. It gives them a stake in stability and a stake in the status quo, and we saw that at play in the most recent election here, when high retrospective taxes by Labor were thoroughly repudiated and dismissed by the asset-owning democracy that we are. So these 5 pillars, giving people a stake in their own communities, a stake in the future, a stake in their communities, and a stake in the future economic success of this country, are the ways in which we cement and embed the Australian middle class and support their success, because ultimately it is the middle class, it is the working class and middle class that inhabit and that take on the values and traditions of the past. They're not the noisy knowledge economy workers, they're not the revolutionaries, they're not out there protesting Adani, they're not out there protesting with the climate extinction people. They want a better life for themselves, and a better life for their children, a better life for their neighbourhood and communities, and they're fundamentally proud to be Australian. But this continued assault on the middle classes and working classes, I would argue, is the biggest existential threat that we face. So I see it from broad centre-right that we need to promote policies that will support and protect the Australian middle classes, because ultimately they are the ones that will harbour a better future for ourselves, and they are the ones, not the noisy elites, not those that are calling us deplorables and irredeemable, but those that are getting up and working every day are the people that will drive the future of this country. Thank you.